Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melisa Liberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to episode number 200 of the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. This is Melisa Liberman, and I'm so excited to share this special milestone with you here today. It is episode 200, which is crazy to me because in so many ways, I feel like I just started the podcast. And in other ways, it feels like we've been doing this a long time together. So anyway, as I was thinking about what would be meaningful as a episode 200, the thing that came to my mind was so many times we're limited in our consulting businesses by not really realizing what's possible for us. And so I want to share this episode with you here today to talk with you about what's possible for you as an independent consultant. Whether you haven't yet launched your business and you're thinking about going in this direction as the next step of your professional life, or whether you've been running a business for 20 years and you feel like you've plateaued, or anywhere in between. Maybe you have been doing this for 18 months and want to really get serious about running the business. Or maybe you've been in business for 3 or 4 years and are ready to take it to the next level. Whatever it is for you, I wanted to record this episode to help you to see what's possible for you as an independent consultant, and to be able to fold that into the plans that you're making for your business vision overall. So that's what we're here today to do. Before we dive in, though, I want to ask you a favor. If you've been listening to this podcast and getting any form of value out of it, I would greatly appreciate you rating and reviewing it on the podcast app that you use to listen to it, like Apple Podcasts, for example. If you can go in and rate and review it, it helps other consultants find this podcast. And to those of you who have shared it, and I know so many of you have shared it with your friends and consulting colleagues and professional colleagues, I really appreciate that. And if you haven't yet had a chance to do that, would be grateful for you to take that step. I know it takes a few minutes, but perhaps sharing it on LinkedIn or sharing it on an email to your friends who are in this space would mean so much to help spread the word. The more of us who are successful as independent consultants, really the tide lifts all boats, as they say. So with that, my sincere gratitude to you as a listener, and I hope you'll get a lot of value out of this episode. So let's talk about the agenda for today. First, we're going to talk about why this matters for your business, this idea about what's possible for you, why it might matter for you and your business. It can be easy to kind of fall into a compare and despair, or feeling like this isn't, whatever I'm going to describe to you isn't possible for you. And I want to say to you that you're capable of achieving so much more than you might be giving yourself credit for. And so we're going to dive into why this topic matters for you and your business. And then I'll give you a word of caution. And then we'll dive into 6 specific real life examples of what's possible for you in a consulting business, solo consulting business or micro boutique consulting business. And then after I go through those 6 examples, we'll talk about what do they all have in common. So you might relate to multiple of the 6 that you want to accomplish, or maybe none of them exactly matches up to what you're wanting to do with your own consulting business. That's okay, because it's really important to hear what they all have in common. What are these success factors? What are the success factors that you would want to be thinking about as you are planning the next set of goals for your consulting business? And then finally, we'll wrap it up with the next steps to put this episode into action. So that's our agenda for today. If you haven't yet downloaded it, I would highly recommend going to download the Consultant's Yearly Plan. And you can find that at melisaliberman.com/plan. And it'll give you a yearly planning process to walk through so that you're, capturing a really good assessment of what's happened over the last 12 months, and then making some really tangible goals for yourself and really important aspects of goal setting that aren't aren't part of the SMART goal setting process that most of us are familiar with. These are specific steps that you would want to take as an independent consultant in order to be successful in setting and achieving the goals that you want to accomplish for your own business and for yourself. So you can find that at melisaliberman.com/plan. We'll put the link in the show notes. And now let's dive into what's possible for you as an independent consultant. And first, I told you we were going to talk about why this matters. Why this matters. It's very simple, really, which is when you know what's possible, it opens up new goals that you may never have considered before. When we get to example number 5, I think it is, you'll see what I'm talking about. When you know what's possible for you, it opens up new goals that you may not have ever considered for yourself. The examples that I'm going to share with you today are going to help you think bigger potentially and think differently about what's available to you as an independent consultant, what's possible for you as an independent consultant, where you don't have to make trade-offs that you might be thinking you have to make in order to achieve what it is that you truly desire. And it also will create evidence for you that you're not just making something up that you don't know is possible or not. This is true evidence for you to really hold on to and say, you know what? I know that this is possible. I've heard this example from Melisa. I'm going to set this goal and figure out how to bring it to life, whatever your goal might be. So that's why it matters. I know for me, for example, when I very first started, when I say very first started, it was probably like the first 4 years were really doing the same thing over and over again. And as they say, achieving the same results because I was thinking the same way. I was using the same examples. I was really limited in what I thought was possible for myself. I thought it would be great to replace my corporate salary and it would be great to have a lot of flexibility because my kids are young now, but they were much, much younger then. And that was kind of it. And I didn't really realize what was possible for myself. I didn't realize I could make $500,000 in a year or $1 million in a year. None of that ever came into my even realm of possibilities. So it wasn't even something I set a goal for. And then as soon as I started seeing other consultants to accomplishing those types of goals, then it started opening up a universe of possibilities. And so that's what we're talking about for you here today, is to hear what is truly possible for you that you might not have even come into your mind so that you can really consider all the different options that you have available to you. A few episodes ago, I don't remember the number, but we'll look it up and put it in the show notes. I interviewed Ron Harpaz, the CEO of lettuce.co, which is a bookkeeping and tax solution for independent consultants. And he was talking about $1 billion business of one and what that might look like. And that definitely never crossed my mind. And quite frankly, that's a pretty big gap for me, even mentally right now, to get to from where I am. But at the same time, it just opens up this idea of where we might be thinking small or playing small. And there's so many different ways to accomplish what we want to be accomplishing in our businesses and maybe don't even realize it because it's just not something that's coming into our universe in terms of the way we're thinking. So that's why this matters. It matters that you have examples and evidence that can open up a new way of thinking about what's possible for you and your business so that you have a bigger set of choices to choose from as you're setting your vision and your goals. But what I do want to give you before we dive into these 6 examples of what's possible for you and your business is a word of caution. And that is, please do not use this episode against yourself. This episode is intended to be an inspiration for you or to open up your mind to other ways of thinking about your business and the vision that you have for it or the goals that you're setting. This is definitely not the space to be comparing to other people the examples I'm going to share with you here today and feeling bad that you haven't yet accomplished that, or you feel behind, or you feel like that overwhelmed by it. That's not what we're here for. We're here for inspiration, that if it's possible for these consultants, and I'm sharing 6 examples with you, but they're not unicorns. They're not unicorns. They're real people like you and I who have accomplished these goals. And quite frankly, there are many other examples of other consultants who have accomplished similar goals. So these are not unicorns, people that, just got lucky or had some unique talent or access to something that we don't have access to. These are normal humans, just like we are, who have accomplished these 6 examples that I'm going to share with you. But please don't compare yourself to them and use that as a way to feel bad or overwhelmed or behind or any of that, because that's definitely not going to do you any good. The second is the but Melissa that I want to caution you against, which is, but Melissa, I don't have the right background. But Melissa, I haven't had as enough experience. You could be listening to these examples that I have and about to share with you, and you could treat them in one of 2 ways. You could treat them as intended, which is inspiration and opening your mind up to ways of doing business that you might not have considered were possible. Or the other way you could take this is to listen to what I'm sharing with you and find the ways that you're different than this example or why it wouldn't work for you. That's not going to do you any good. And like I said, I'm sharing 6 specific examples with you, but there are so many other similar examples beneath those that I could share with you. It's not just about this one example or this one person. It's about an example that highlights something that's possible for you as a business owner. So please do not use this against yourself. Please. Well, so many of us do, and that's just not helpful at any level. Okay. So with that, I'm going to share with you what are these 6 examples, and then we're going to dive into all of them. But the overarching theme I would say to you is it is possible for you to have it all. It's possible for you to have the amount of time that you want to be working. It's possible for you to make the amount of money that you want to be making. And it's possible for you to feel as fulfilled as you want to be in the nature of the work that you're doing. It is possible for you in this business model. And so as I share those examples, I want to dive into each one of them. I've been saying there's 6, but there's actually 5. So we have 5 examples here of what's possible for you in your business. Again, I'm using some really specific examples, but know that I could have picked from so many other people to use as an example, that this isn't just a unicorn, like I said before. Okay, so let me tell you what this 5 are, and then we'll dive into each one of them. So number 1, as a new business owner, making $600,000 in the first year. I share that example, and we'll go into it here in a little bit in more detail in a moment. I share that example of 600K because a lot of times we think it's possible to replace our corporate income in the first year and then move on from there. And I'm sharing this 600K with you, which is almost double, a little less than double, I should say, of that person's corporate income, corporate compensation, and sharing with you how it's possible to make so much more just in your first year. The second example is doubling revenue in a year without working more. The third example is taking off the summer without impacting the income. The fourth is increasing the amount of fulfillment in the work that this consultant has been doing and really doubling. I'll talk with you a little bit about how that's even measured, but doubling that in the sense of feeling more fulfilled and less bored with the type of work that this consultant was doing. And then the last one is, I'll give you the example of the $1 million solo business. So those are the 5 examples that we're going to dive into right now. And let's start with the first one, which is launching a brand new business and making $600K in year 1, which exceeded this consultant's corporate compensation. They had set a goal to replace their income, and instead of just replacing their income, ended up the end of the year making $600K, or the end of the 12-month period making $600K. So it doesn't have to be a driver for you to replace your income, especially if you've just started out or you've been doing business for a couple of years. You can truly exceed your income. How is that possible? So this consultant took the leap from corporate and then took on their first client, which was their former employer, which many of us, that's our first client, is our former employer. And so that created a pillar client for them, which was at $25K per month on a retainer. And then they signed 2 more clients at $18K per month, which I think those engagements were 5 or 6 months each. And then they also signed or landed 6 to 7 short-term strategy engagements, which were around $10K each. And so the result of all of that was a 600K business. So you'll hear what I just described to you, 6 to 7 short-term strategy engagements at 10K each. So it's 60 to 70K in total in short-term strategy engagements, which then, was a great way to land initial work with a new client. And then a couple of those turned into longer term engagements, which were 18K per month and lasted for 5 to 6 months. So the math of all of this puts us at around 600K. And for this particular consultant, they were working with 2 clients at any given time, which was the pillar client, the former employer, plus 1 more client at the 18K per month each. So we had the 25K pillar client plus another one that was 18K. So there were 2 clients that they had that were more consistent. And then they would have a shorter quick hit strategy engagement on top of that periodically. And so you can hear, hopefully, in what I'm describing to you, that this is a sustainable from a number of hours perspective, from a working schedule perspective, and also generated this 60K-ish per month, or a little less than that, 600K over the year. So that hopefully gives you a tangible picture of what they were offering, to whom they were offering it in terms of the former client and having those two long-standing clients, and then the shorter-term quick hit strategy engagements that then would replenish the pillar clients as needed. That's example number 1, how to launch and create a sizable, impressive business in year 1. Let's go, and I just remind you that I'm going to go through these examples and I'm going to talk with you with each of these 5 examples in a more tangible way of what it looked like. And then we'll talk about what did they have in common. We talk about how they're doing it, but a deeper level of what did they need to have in place from a success factors perspective to bring these goals to life. I'll share that with you once we get through the examples. Okay, so the second example is a consultant who doubled his revenue without working more. So he was making around $250 per year, and he was able to double it to $500K per year, but still work 4 days a week, 3 on client delivery and 1 on his business. Plus or minus. Sometimes it was like 3.5 on client work and half on his business, but it averaged out, I would say, to 3 days a week on his client and 1 day on his business. So how did he do this? What he did was, first, he increased the impact and the value of what he was offering. So he became much more specialized for a very much more specific type of client, so that his expertise was able to be highlighted more than being a generalist. So that's the first thing that he did, is really clean up his offerings in the sense of making them more specialized, more specific, and able to therefore command higher pricing because of that expertise, showing that he knew exactly what his clients needed for the given industry that he's working in. And then secondly, he took more control over lead generation. So rather than taking, he had come into this making $250 by a lot of word of mouth and referrals. And so he switched this up by taking more control over his lead generation through things like speaking and attending industry events and figuring out how to convert those things in those activities into leads for his business and conversations that turn into opportunities. The third thing that he did was he started to charge based on fixed fee that was much more leaning toward value than based on the amount of time he was spending. So he did not shift into value-based pricing yet. I want to be really clear about that. But what he did do is shift from time-based pricing, hourly and daily type pricing, into fixed fee type pricing, that where he set a floor based on the amount of time that he estimated a given project would take, and then adding a lot of buffer in there to make sure that he wasn't undercutting himself. And so as he started to evolve more toward value-based pricing, he was able to then make more revenue working the same amount of time. And then the last component of how he doubled his business without working more is that he implemented that compound goal process that we talked about in episode 176, where he set both a revenue goal, 500K, and also a time goal where he said, look, I'm going to make 500K, but the constraint is that it still has to be within my 4-day work week. And so through those 4 strategies, he was able to double his revenue without working more. Okay, let's move on to example number 3, which is taking off the summer without it impacting the overall annual income. So there was a consultant that is this example who was very burned out. She felt really trapped in her business because she was charging based on time. And so every hour really that she took off was what meant that she was losing money in her mind and felt almost like a pseudo employee because she was working for this client, a long-term client that she was basically attending team meetings, doing everything from attending team meetings to producing deliverables to responding to fires. And it felt much like a pseudo employee, if not a real employee. The only difference is she didn't have a paycheck. She had a consulting agreement. And she was just really feeling frustrated and burned out and wanting to take off big chunks of time to travel, such as the summer. She wanted a 2-month summer break and was able to implement that 2-month summer break, even though she'd never done that before, and make slightly more than she had the previous year in 12 months. So in 10-month period, she was able to make slightly more than she had done the previous year in 12 months, plus have really a 2-month break where she did a little bit of business. She didn't completely shut it down, but we're talking about a handful of hours every week instead of, a 30, 40, 50 hour work week. So how did she do that? The first is that she planned ahead. She planned ahead, really thinking about her business as a rolling 12-month calendar instead of an annual calendar. And why that was important is it allowed her to really think ahead to, the next year and what it would look like to create a nest egg for herself, what it would look like, what kind of offerings she would need to offer that were different than the work she had been doing, which was much more akin to staff augmentation, and really think about, okay, what do I want to shift the nature of work into so that I can have shorter projects and a shorter lead time on closing those projects, a higher amount of revenue per project, and ultimately have the ability to take 2 months off. So she planned ahead using a 12-month rolling calendar like I described. And quite frankly, you can download that tool that I shared with you at the beginning, melisaliberman.com/plan. And thinking about this from a big picture perspective, what are those big goals that feel impossible? You can make them happen if you put some planning in place. You know that. That's what you do as a consultant. Do this for your business. So she shifted the services that she was offering from more long-term execution type projects to shorter term strategy type engagements. She increased her pricing and changed it to fixed fee instead of hourly and daily. And she built a cushion for herself so that she didn't feel nervous coming back and feeling as though she had put herself into a bad situation. She created a cushion because she knew what it took to run her business on a monthly basis, her salary, even if she wasn't working, how much money did she want to pay herself based on her personal expenses and other personal goals? What did she want her salary to be? What were her business expenses? Which, some of those she could cut down a little bit while she was gone, put subscriptions on hold, that kind of thing. Other things she couldn't. So she knew what her monthly, minimum was that she needed to make. And so that's how she calculated her cushion. And then ultimately also went through a process from a lead generation perspective to pre-schedule a few clients for her return. So she wasn't, she really set up, I love to call it, I was setting up your future self. She really set up her future self by having that cushion and those pre-scheduled clients for her return. So that gives you example number 3, taking a summer off or whatever you want to take off without impacting your income. Okay, number 4, which is increased fulfillment. Well, let me go back though. I just want to address something before we do, which is I said taking the summer off without impacting the income. I don't know if I specifically addressed the income side of this, so I want to make sure I do that. We talked a little bit about the cushion based on how much her salary would be and making sure that she was able to pay herself, even though she didn't have clients paying her in those 2 months. And then also that she pre-scheduled the clients for her return. But more specifically, why I'm saying she was able to take those 2 months off without impacting her revenue and her income is because she was able to shift the type of work she was doing into higher level strategy type work and therefore increase her pricing. So she was able to generate the same amount of revenue, if not even a little bit more, and take the time off as well. Okay, so let's now move on to example number 4, which is increased fulfillment. We want this as consultants. We don't want to work with clients that are difficult or where we don't feel valued or impactful. And a lot of times I see sacrifices being made where we think I need to take the money and I'll have to deal with this client, even though I see red flags, to make sure that I'm, not leaving money on the table. And it doesn't have to be this way. And that's why I wanted to share this example with you. Like I said earlier, it can be a little bit harder to measure. Although one of the things I love to do is to measure not only the financial aspects of the business, but also what are your fulfillment levels? You can be measuring that even on a scale of 1 to 10. How fulfilled am I working with this client? And you could do it kind of monthly or mid-project or end of project, like really capturing those kind of data metrics so that, sometimes we have revisionist history when we're finished with a project and tell ourselves it wasn't as bad as we thought it was. And just having some of those data points can be really helpful. But this particular situation, this consultant had been taking on clients that came to him. And so whatever the nature of the work was, he would say yes, because he didn't want to leave money off the table. He didn't want to, as they say, not have a bird in the hand, right? When something came to him, he always talked himself into taking it, even if there were red flags. But over time, he felt underutilized. He felt bored. He even started thinking about going back to corporate because the nature of the work just wasn't fulfilling. It was the type of work that he had done when he was, much earlier on in his career. And even though he was getting paid for it, it just felt very mundane. And so rather than going back to corporate, what he was able to do is really revisit his business model, revisit what he was offering and to whom he was offering it. And through all of that, restore the motivation and excitement and drive that he had when he first started his business. And specifically what that looked like is that number 1, he tightened up his business model. He made it really clear to himself what he was going to offer, what he was going to do, what the pricing would look like, and to whom he would be selling his services, what is his target market. He got really clear with himself so that when an opportunity came his way or when he found an opportunity, he had something clear and tangible to measure it against, to compare it against, rather than constantly talking himself into something. He also is committed to a niche or a specialization. So rather than being a generalist, as so many of us are, especially when we first start out, he really committed to a specialization as part of that tightened business model. And he shifted his pricing from time-based to value-based pricing so that he was making a higher effective rate for the type of work that he was doing. His time was worth more at the end of the day. And he created control over his pipeline. He built a formula that he could use to fill his pipeline as he needed to, and where he felt like he had control over the pipeline and wasn't at the mercy of whatever came across his desk. And through all of that, he was able to attract more ideal clients who were paying him more, clients that were really interesting to him, that he was excited to dive into the challenges that they were facing and figure out solutions to them. And not only that, but also because he was specialized, he was able to start building frameworks and intellectual property that he could take, as a methodology from one client to another. And so that's so much of where the excitement and motivation came from, is that he knew that he wasn't just working with a given client and the project when, he would roll off when it was done, but that he was, now through the work that he did to shift his business model was implementing not only something for the client that they valued, but also creating something valuable for himself and his business. and ultimately was able to get to the place where he was turning away work. If it didn't meet his qualification criteria, he would be able to say to them, you know what, I am not the best consultant for you. Here are some recommendations of other consultants that might be a better fit, and build himself a little referral pipeline as well, a little stream of revenue there. So that's the fourth example of how it's so possible to increase fulfillment and measure it in the way that I shared with you. On a scale of 1 to 10, how fulfilled am I by this client work that I'm doing in the last month? Or however you want to phrase that question, but asking yourself and answering that so you've got a record of it as you go. And the fifth example is the $1 million solo business with an 82% profit margin. That part is important. A lot of time we hear about $80 million businesses, and then we find out, oh, I didn't realize that they were spending all of this money on internal resources and subcontractors, and at the end of the day are making $250K in profit off of $1 million. That's really not what we're looking for here, right? So that's why I shared with you, it's $1 million business with 82% profit margin. What does that look like? What does that look like? And I've shared some examples on the podcast before. There was an episode, we'll put the link in the show notes, but there was an episode of, I don't know, maybe 40 or 50 ago where we talked about what's possible, how to get to $1 million. But in this example, this consultant had two $35K per month pillar clients. Again, I'm going to remind you, if you are thinking when I say this to you, oh, I don't know how I could get to one $35K per month pillar client, let alone two. The goal of this episode is not for you to sit there thinking about why it wouldn't work for you. The goal is start thinking about, oh, that's possible. How could I make that possible for myself and my business? So they had two pillar clients going on at any given time. They had between 10 and 12 strategy projects that were quick hit type projects, 3 or 4 week type projects. And they also had around $150K in passive revenue. By that, I mean, I don't know if anything's really passive to you, but in the sense of passive, in the sense of they weren't directly involved in the delivery. So these are things like referrals and success fees and other consultants, work underneath them where they weren't really overseeing it, but they were, running through their business. Again, this is a solo business. So we don't have, in this example, there's not a ton of subcontractors or anything like that. There's just maybe one at any given time who's running much more client-facing delivery. And the bulk of the work and the revenue is coming from this consultant's direct work with two pillar clients, along with other strategy projects. And then, like I said, that passive revenue, which are referrals and success fees, primarily. So that's how it got to the $1 million business. And then the 82% profit margin came from internal support type contractors. This consultant has a non-client facing business analyst. So they can go to that business analyst and say, listen, here's a bunch of data. Can you put this into these types of charts for me? And gives them a lot of head start on deliverables to make their delivery more scalable. And then they also have an assistant who helps them with scheduling and things like that. And some content, like drafting of content using ChatGPT that then they heavily edit. And then they also have a bookkeeper and a coach, obviously. I will say that. Okay, so these are the 5 examples of what's possible for you. Hopefully through all of those examples, or at least a few of them, you were inspired by what is possible compared to where you're at right now. And again, not using that against yourself, that you're behind or that you are somehow ineffective in running a business. But the point of this episode is to show you what's possible that you might not have considered before. So now that you've got these 5 examples, let's talk about what do they have in common. And to me, it really boils down to 4 main things. The first is that they have a strategy. They have a strategy. And by that, I mean, they know what their business model is. They know what they're offering. They know who they're offering it to. They know how that fits into their capacity and availability. They know how the pricing matches up to their overall goals for revenue and profit. So they have a strategy in place. That business model also has a specialization. It's not a generalist type business. So number 1, that's what they have in common. They have a strategy. Number 2, they have processes in place. by processes, I mean they have a lead generation process. They know how they can fill their own pipeline without feeling dependent on others or that it's out of their control. They have a very specific step-by-step sales process in place. They have a process of evaluating frequently and adjusting based on the awareness that they gain from that evaluation. And they have a pricing process in place. So those are the types of processes that they've got in place in their business. And they all started out in some form or fashion, I would call it in more of an MVP, minimum viable process. And then I know what MVP stands for, minimum viable product, but in this case, it's a minimum viable process that, where they started out really simple and then optimized it through this evaluation and adjusting. So that's what do they have in common? Number two is they have process in place. So first they have strategy in place, then they have process in place. The third thing that they have in place is a business owner mindset. You're probably, if you've ever listened to this podcast before, you're not surprised that this would be a component of it because it is truly a game changer to be shifting out of employee mindset or out of new business owner mindset or out of dependent business owner mindset into confident, successful business owner mindset. What that looks like, what does that mean to have a business owner mindset? It means that you have confidence that you'll succeed ahead of any evidence or proof. It means that you prioritize working on the business alongside working in the business. It means that you think differently than you have before, where you've probably been socialized to think like an employee for the last 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, whatever it is. Noticing what the differences are and then thinking like a business owner instead of as an employee. A willingness. They have a willingness to fail. They are willing to fail. They are willing to look foolish. They are willing to be wrong. They are willing for something not to work the first time and to continue adjusting it until it does. And they have a high quality money mindset. When I say a business owner mindset, these are some of the characteristics of what that mindset looks like across all 5 of these examples. And then finally, the fourth component that they all have in common is that they focus on business owner skill building. You were likely very successful in corporate. So many of us were. But when you go out to run a consulting business, you will have skill gaps. You will be great at consulting for your clients. And you will likely be someone who is constantly learning about, how to better solve your clients' problems, always augmenting your skill set from a delivery perspective. It's equally as important to fill in the gaps when you don't know how to market your business, when you don't know how to generate leads, when you don't know how to sell your services effectively, when you don't know how to sell value-based pricing instead of time-based pricing. Those are all business owner skills that are important to build. And it's not just a one and done. It's an evolution where you're constantly building upon what you already, what you've figured out so far. So those are the 4 buckets that they have in common. They have a strategy. They have process in place. They have a strong and business owner mindset and a process of continuously building and strengthening that business owner mindset even more. And they have a business owner skill building focus for themselves and for their business. So just one last reminder as we wrap up today's episode, and then we'll talk about how you can put this into action. But before we do, I just want to remind you one more time, but Melisa, when you notice yourself saying, well, I don't have fill in the blank the way that one example was, and this won't work for me, or I can't do that thing. I can't create $1 million solo business. I'm only at 150K right now. I can't take 2 months off in the summer. For whatever reason, you might be arguing with me right now on this episode. I want to say to you, it might be true that you don't have whatever it is the way that the example was that I just shared with you. And that's okay. You're a human and no 2 of us are alike. So ask yourself, what do you have? How can what you want be possible for you? Instead of arguing for your limitations, I implore you to be asking yourself, what is it that you truly want? What example that I just shared with you is most similar to what it is that you want, or maybe it's some combination of all of them. And then ask yourself, how can I get that? What do I need to put in place? How can I make this possible for myself? It can be possible for you if you start putting that question at the top of your priorities and really answering it over and over again until you bring that goal into reality. So, as we wrap up today's episode, I want to share with you 3 ways to put what we talked about today into action. The first is to take a minute and get clear about what you want and dream big. Don't limit yourself by what you think is realistic or practical just so you can feel better about reaching a goal that you set. Think big. Think about, I want to create $1.5 million business, $1.5 million business working 3 days a week. Think big. Figure out how to make that happen instead of quashing yourself and suppressing yourself and watering down what you truly want in life because of what you think is realistic or practical. So get clear about what you want. Stretch your vision. Then number 2, build out a plan to get there. And you can do that by using the tool that I shared with you at the beginning. It's a free download, my consultant's yearly planning process. You can find it at melisaliberman.com/plan. And the last of the 3 steps to put this episode into action is get one-on-one personalized help. I can help you. Come to me with your biggest goal, the one that you might be afraid to say to yourself, let alone to anyone else. And let's talk about what that goal is and what it would look like to bring it to life for yourself and for your business. That is what I do as a coach, helping you to achieve goals that you never imagined were possible for you. You can apply for a spot on my calendar at consultmelisa.com. We'll put the link in the show notes. And it's a 45-minute exploratory call. We'll get to know each other and you'll share with me what your goal is and what might be the obstacles in your way from reaching that goal. And we'll talk about what coaching would look like in that context to see if it would be a good fit for you. All right. Thank you for listening to episode number 200, and I'll see you again next week. Take care.
Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melisaliberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.